I'm Barry Sweeny, a proud native of Ballyshannon, Ireland's oldest town. And some people often ask why Ballyshannon is known as the oldest town in Ireland. And it's because many moons ago, about 5,000 years ago, the first settlers landed. They sailed up the west coast of Ireland and they saw the Erne estuary and thought it might be a nice place to stay. Travelled up the estuary and landed on a little island that became known as Inishsamor. And they took care of the natives and settled in Ballyshannon and stayed in this town for about 200 years. Now, that was before the oldest of the Egyptian pyramids were built, so we're talking about a long time ago. And they stayed around for a while, and it became a place of continual habitation since then. It was a good spot. We had a good food source, we had a strategic high hill and a good view out to sea and a good view around the low-lying land in the area. So that's why Partholon and his people landed here and stayed here. Now, over the years, there's been a number of archaeological finds which would suggest that people have lived, and this has been a place of continual habitation since that time of 2750 BC. This occasion, this happening, was recorded in the Book of Invasions and in older history books like the Annals of the Four Masters and that, as an actual event that did happen. So it's not just hearsay from down the pub. There's a bit of mythology and there's a bit of historical fact mixed in here to this. So that's why we in Ballyshannon call it Ireland's oldest town, and we're sticking to it. There's a lot of, I suppose, famous people who came from here. We've got, say, the poet William Allingham, who was born in Ballyshannon, up the Airy Mountain, down the Rushy Glen and all that. We've got, of course, Rory Gallagher. He's one of our favourite sons of the town. He was born here in 1948. World famous rock and blues guitarist, and he's celebrated year round here, but particularly during the festival on the June bank holiday weekend in Ballyshannon. There's a lot of activities. It's a beautiful place to be. You're close to the sea. If you're into your fishing, there's great rivers and lakes and sea angling in the area. So it's a haven for fishermen. For sports people, there's a lot of good things around here. A lot of very successful sports stars have actually come from this town, believe it or not. We had an Olympic boxer many moons ago from Ballyshannon, and in more recent times we have a swimmer who trains down in the swimming pool just down here, Mona McSharry, and she's just won a world championship last year, and she'll be destined for the Olympics, I think, next year. So one of our local landmarks here, it's the iconic town clock building here. It was formerly a jeweller's shop, but it was originally built as the Belfast Bank. And the story goes that when they were getting their planning permission for this building, that they came too far out on the road and they contravened the planning laws. So they had to build this tower with the clock face on the top of it for the people of the town, so as everybody could tell the time. And that was part of their planning conditions at the time. But it was built in 1878. And it's a fine old building. It's in need of restoration at the moment, and we're hopeful that's going to happen pretty soon. You might note that the clock face is actually gone from the other side of it at the moment, but we're going to get it fixed and sorted out. The community of Ballyshannon and the new owner of this building is looking after that for us. So here we have one of the famous sons of Ballyshannon. This is Rory Gallagher, the one and only Rory Gallagher, world famous rock and blues musician. Rory was born in Ballyshannon in the Rock Hospital, appropriately enough, in 1948 on the 2nd of March. And Rory sadly passed away in 1995, but in the meantime he created some fantastic music, and he travelled the world with his music, and he created new sounds and played the guitar like it had probably never been played before, and he influenced so many people all around the world. He's really, really highly respected by musicians all over the world, and now they come to honour Rory in Ballyshannon every year for the Rory Gallagher Festival weekend. It's the June bank holiday weekend, and people just travel from all corners of the world, and we have a great festival each week. The sculpture itself here was created by David Anand. He's a lovely Scottish man who came over, and we looked after him one year, and he came back the next year and he had a fantastic sculpture, so simple as that. But it's adorned. It's a bit of a pilgrimage for people to come here each year. So here we are at the Pauper's Graveyard, and this Pauper's Graveyard is situated on Mullach na Shee, the fairy hilltop here in Ballyshannon. It's a very, very historic site, and as you might see behind me, we're up on the highest point in Ballyshannon, looking out over the Erne estuary, right out to the Atlantic Ocean there. And there's a lot of flat land around here, so it's no surprise that this is a very historic site. Over the years, there have been many battles fought from here, and many burials of Irish chieftains and mythological characters from many, many years ago. And then I suppose in more recent history, during the famine, this was used as a famine graveyard. And across the way we have the workhouse, the Ballyshannon workhouse, where about 1,000 people died during the famine, over a period of about 4 years. And 1,000 poor souls were buried in this graveyard here. So it's a sad place to be. It's a beautiful location, but it's a poignant place to come and have a little think and a visit to here, to think about those poor souls who are buried here without any markings or graveyard stones or anything like that. And in fact, we don't even know the names of the people who are buried here. There are some records of about 3 different people who we have names of, but aside from that, it seemed like they didn't matter. We know the names of the people who built the walls around this graveyard and how much they were paid. We know that the grave digger here was paid a certain amount, and that he was entitled to a new pair of boots every year, because they're things that cost money. We know who built the steps down at the start, because they were paid money, and it seems that if there wasn't money involved, maybe those records weren't ever taken, or at least they weren't kept. So it's kind of a sad thing. We've had almost 1,000 people who came along as part of a project to plant 1,000 daffodil bulbs along the path on the way up here, as a small bit of remembrance towards those 1,000 famine victims. And each year those people, those kids, mostly school kids, can come and visit and see their daffodils when they come up. But there's a symbolic thing there, and perhaps these children will learn and appreciate, their history, and connect with this part of Irish history, which is something that shouldn't really be forgotten, but should be respected. And so aside from that, it's a nice place to come and have a view out over the Atlantic Ocean. But there's some lovely sunsets from here on a nice summer's evening. This site was used by the British forces. They were attacking O'Donnell's castle, which was down here. Red Hugh O'Donnell, the famous Red Hugh, his family had the castle in Ballyshannon, which was a fortification protecting Tyrconnell, the land of Connell here, against other Gaelic clans, and also in different battles against the British. This area, the river that runs down below us here, was a natural fortification between Connacht and Ulster. So it was the site of many battles. During the Battle of Ballyshannon in 1594, and there's the bell going, we're at St. Anne's Church, and during the Battle of Ballyshannon in 1594, the English troops had come to try and cross the river into Tyrconnell, but they did a big loop around by Ballyke and came back in here to Abiasaro and set up camp there. So they came up here as their attacking point for the castle down below, and there were, I think, 600 troops at the time who went down to try and attack the castle, which was defended by 80 soldiers in there, which interestingly included, I think, 4 soldiers from the Spanish Armada who were shipwrecked out at Stregia, and they were taken in by O'Donnell's, and they fought at that stage against the other troops, and with sticks and stones and muskets and whatever they had, they drove the British army away, and it was a good day for Ballyshannon, I suppose. So by the time O'Donnell had some support coming, it was time for the English forces to leave at that stage, and they headed across the river down below us here to try and flee back towards Connacht. Unfortunately for them, along the river there was a lot of rain at the time, and a lot of people were swept out to sea. There were soldiers and even their families. A lot of women travelled with the army at the time, and I think with their long dresses, it was recorded with their long dresses and stuff, that they were waterlogged and dragged out to sea, and horses and everything. So there was quite a lot of casualties down here as a result of that, and the rest of them fled off out towards Bundoran and back to Connacht, and they were chased off by the O'Donnells and some of their allies at the time. So it was an interesting time, but this is one of the sites where a lot of activity happened during the Battle of Ballyshannon. And here we have St Anne's Church sitting proudly here on the top of Mullinashee, and actually within the graveyard here there are many famous people buried in this graveyard. You've got our poet William Allingham is one of the people buried in here, and there are many famous engineers and military people who were buried in there over the years. But an interesting one is over in this corner of the graveyard. We've got the Thornley family, and the Thornleys, the two people who are buried here were also married in this church, but they are actually the grandparents of Bram Stoker. So Bram Stoker and the Thornleys themselves moved to Sligo, and then moved on to Clontarf, where Bram was eventually born over there. But Bram would have returned to Sligo to his grandparents, and he was particularly close with his grandmother while he was a sick child. He spent a lot of time with his grandmother, and around his grandmother would have experienced the cholera outbreak in Sligo at the time in 1830s, and some of that family decided to flee to Ballyshannon to come here to get away from the cholera outbreak in Sligo, but there were barricades up and people weren't allowed to move from town to town, but they were ingenious enough to get a boat somewhere along the line and land over around Kildoney, Creevy area, and make their way to some friends, relatives that were in Ballyshannon for a wee bit of to a safe house. So there were many stories that Bram's grandmother would have experienced, and situations she would have told and spoke to Bram about, and it's said that some of these images and that stuck with Bram, and perhaps this was the basis for some of his writings in the novel Dracula and in the film. So the scary things that can happen around here, but in there, that's where where Dracula's granny is buried, in fact. And not only that, but the bell is ringing again. There we go again. And not only that, but as well as Dracula, there's connection to Frankenstein for Ballyshannon too, because Mary Shelley's mother, as far as I know, came from Ballyshannon, and Mary Shelley, of course, the writer of Frankenstein. So we've got Dracula's granny and Frankenstein's mother-in-law came from Ballyshannon, so it's a kind of a spooky enough place, particularly around Halloween. Scary things going on. So there you have it. That's a little snapshot of Ballyshanon's history, some of the stories. It's a good place to live, I was born and bred here, and it's proud of it, and I see loads and loads of good things and potential within this area. But you know what? Why don't you just come along and see it for yourself? Eh?